Will Boogie dance his way into the NBA draft, or will the star guard make his way back to college hoops next season?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, joined today by our regular guest and the host of the Locked On College Basketball Game Night Show, Leaf Thulin. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Well, Leaf and I are talking some NBA draft decisions here. We're about a little less than a week out from the NBA draft combine. We got the G League Elite Camp starting in just a couple of days. And we're going to talk about 6 NBA draft candidates, 2 guards, 2 wings, and 2 bigs, who we're going to kind of discuss whether they should stay in the draft, whether we think they should come back to school, what they may need to do at the combine. All 6 of these players are on the list invited to the combine. So we know it'll kind of depend on how they do there, but we got a couple of guys who are in the transfer portal, so they could end up playing somewhere else next year. We got a couple guys who are not in the portal, one guy who already committed somewhere in the portal. So we're just going to kind of go around the horn on these 6 players and kind of discuss where we think they might end up next year. Leaf, we're going to start with a pair of guards. And we're going to start with the guard out of Arkansas. Both of these potential one-and-done candidates out of the college hoop space. And we're going to start with Boogie Fland, who, of course, spent last year at Arkansas, dealt with the injury in the middle of the season. So he only ended up playing 21 games for Coach Calipari's team. He is currently in the transfer portal, so he has the option to return to Arkansas, return and go to the highest bidder or whomever wants to have him in the portal, or stay in the draft process. And I think for most of the season, Leaf, it felt like Boogie was pretty clearly going to be a one and done candidate. And then he gets hurt. And then Arkansas looks better without him, which I think is not really his fault necessarily. I think it's the fault of the roster construction, but I have to imagine scouts are going to consider the fact that Arkansas looked like a better team when he was not on the floor. He's 6'2". He wasn't a great finisher around the rim, but he's a good shooter. He's a great passer. There's a lot of things to really like about Boogie, especially with his youth and upside, but I'm kind of curious where you're at with Fland at this point, because it feels like it's a lot murkier than it was a few months ago for Boogie's NBA draft prospects.
Yeah, the first thing to say in this is his commitment to the transfer portal, or declaration that he was intending to transfer, said in it that he's 100% focused on the NBA draft.
Yeah.
Very rarely do you see that. You see, I mentioned the transfer portal, thanks for wherever I've been. And with that said, I'm considering the NBA draft too. You don't see many people have almost a disclaimer saying, yeah, I'm going to go to the NBA draft. So, you can recruit me. You'd have to give me a heck of a pitch to get me out of here. The one thing I would say as hesitancy for Boogie Fland, as you mentioned, he did not play at a level that you'd say, wow, like he's a no-brainer one and done, despite being a McDonald's All-American and a Calipari guard. Like the track record for that is very good, but he wasn't playing at that level. Then Arkansas got better. Like you said, probably not all his fault. They had too many cooks in the kitchen, and it simplified things. He tried hard to come back and play, which I respected. But the greater point to me is he's a very slight of build, 6'2" guard. If you look at the history of the NBA draft, the players who even have been drafted of that stature, even one like Rob Dillingham, who I really liked last year, hardly plays. Reed Shepherd, though he went number 3 and he was on a team that was number 2 in the West, like that's very rare, hardly played. And, typically you can say, oh, they'll play in the future. That's not typically what you want from a lottery pick. I don't think Boogie Fland's a lottery pick. And therefore, if he sees that, I think it incentivizes him to go back to school. And that's why I think he's reconsidering it. I'd still lean like it's more likely for him to go to the NBA draft because of his declaration of 100% commitment. But I guarantee it's not an 100% commitment right now.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think for me, there's a lot of things that Boogie Fland does really well, but at the end of the day, he's 6'2". He's not very big. And it's not like, again, you look at Dillingham or Shepherd, like those guys were really, really good shooters. And Boogie was fine. And I think he could develop into a good shooter, but the risk of, if he's not an elite shooter, the profile is just not good enough to be, I mean, it doesn't mean he's not good enough to be an NBA player, but not good enough to take a chance on super early in this draft. And like you said, if that's the case, I think he's maybe better off going back to school. And Leaf, I'm really curious about this other guy on the list here, a very different type of guard. It's Drake Powell from North Carolina. Powell is not in the transfer portal. However, he has seemed to make it pretty clear that he is all in on the NBA draft as well. I'm a bit more skeptical of that. I'm curious if he may end up opting to return to Carolina, where he'd likely have a bigger role than he did last year. And he was fine last year. I mean, he's very efficient scorer, 57% on his 2-point attempts, 38% from three. It's only 65% from the line. He's a 6'6" guard, really good athlete. I like a lot of what he can do, but he's pretty raw. And I think that's what makes me intrigued by, this is the kid who always wanted to play at North Carolina, got his chance to play at North Carolina, and now he kind of seems ready to get out the door and go play in the pros. And I don't blame anybody for wanting to make the NBA, but I'm not sure that he's cooked enough in college yet. I'm curious what you think about what we saw from Powell in his first year last year with the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I'm torn because I felt like he was a better prospect than Ian Jackson, despite that torrid stretch where Ian Jackson looked like he was making Carolina a threat again, where he was scoring really at high rates, because Ian Jackson's an isolation guard and his efficiency wasn't great. Drake Powell does what the NBA desires in the sense of his measurables are very good. Yeah. He's long, he's athletic, he's strong. His shot, I wouldn't say it's a weakness, but I wouldn't say it's a strength, which therefore is a weakness in terms of in the NBA, you want to be able to knock down shots, but it doesn't look like it's broken. So there could be some optimism. And he's got just rare defensive ability and traits. There's been a track record of guys who get drafted in the first round with similar builds and honestly production. It's rare, but there's one or two every year that fit that mold. Think of Peyton Watson, who's contributing for the Nuggets right now. He scored 3 points a game at UCLA, was a McDonald's All-American, and that UCLA team was good, but it wasn't the team that made the Final Four. So it's a blue blood where a McDonald's All-American puts up underachieving stats and is known for defensive prowess, and all of a sudden he's a contributing player. That said, that's an anomaly of a sort, but I think Drake Powell, it'll be very dependent on how he shoots the ball at the combine. He's one of those guys that if he shoots it well, I think he should stay in the draft because he's got the tools and the intelligence with which he played, I think, stands out. So if he shoots the ball well and he can say, you know what, here's my interview. I felt like I was used incorrectly at North Carolina. I've got more to me than that. I think he could go in the first round. He's likely an early second round pick. North Carolina was kind of a weird recruiting bed for him, though, because you look at how they filled their team since his potential entering the draft. I don't know if he goes back there. I'm going to say he stays in. That's my gut feeling.
I'm with you. I think he's going to stay in as well. I think he kind of made it pretty clear that he wants to stay in the draft, and that's his goal. He strikes me as somebody whose game will translate better in the NBA than it would in college. And that's not even Carolina specific. I think it's just from a floor spacing perspective. I think it's just going to work out a little bit better for him. I mean, he shot 38% from three last year, so it's not like the actual results were all that bad, but the volume wasn't very high. The free throw shooting wasn't great. I'm with you that there's some skepticism on the shot, but the athleticism, the length, the defensive ability, I mean, it's not hard to see a 3-and-D wing here, and a team's going to take a chance on him. I mean, Bleacher Report's mock has him 42nd. By the way, they have planned 40th, so both those guys kind of being in that middle second round. I think for Boogie, if he thought he was going 40th, he's probably coming back to school. I think for Drake, if he's going at all, I think he's probably out. I think 42 is a little low for him. I wouldn't be surprised if he shoots well at the combine and vaults his way into the late first or at least early second conversation. I could see a contending team taking a shot on him, hoping he can develop into a 3-and-D type wing, because I think that the upside, the playmaking is definitely leaves some to be desired. Barely an assist a game last year, but again, I think that was a product of the system, and I think we'll see him kind of improve in that space. I think he's going to be gone. I think he's going to be in the NBA next year. I think Carolina's already working hard to replace him on the roster because I think they're expecting that as well. Leaf, we got a couple other players to talk about here that are wings. I know Powell's sort of a wing, but some older prospects who are kind of on the draft radar, some who might return to school. Very talented, very versatile wings. Both these players are in the transfer portal as well, so they could really upend the market for players in the college basketball space if they end up returning to school. We're going to talk about these two guys and where they might play ball next year coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. So whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, you can have multiple qualified candidates to choose from. So instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, Leaf, a couple of veteran wings to talk about here, both who are in the transfer portal, both who are in the NBA draft process, both who will be at the draft combine starting on May 11th. We're going to start with former Texas Tech wing Darrion Williams. Bleacher Report has him 45th in their most recent mock draft. 6'6" wing, averaged 15 points, 5.5 boards, over 3.5 assists per game last year. Pretty efficient scorer. Was only 34% from three last year, but was much better than that his previous year at Texas Tech. So I think there's some optimism that the three-point shot is there. He's got a lot of offensive versatility. We saw him post up a lot last year. He's got a good driving game, was a decent finisher. Again, can space the floor a little bit. For me, I saw a player who was really reliant on just out-muscling people, being stronger than his opponents and being able to kind of push his way through and get buckets that way. It's tough to see that translating at the next level, just because, yes, he's a good athlete, but his athleticism isn't going to be what he can kind of hang his hat on at the next level necessarily. So I am curious about a player who seems to rely on something that may not be there for him at the next level. And I'm sure scouts are kind of questioning that as well. But the overall offensive versatility for Williams is absolutely there. And I could see him being a role player at the next level. Having said that, I could also see him opting to return to school where there's, opportunities to make some real money and play a starring role. If he comes back, he's immediately one of, if not the most desirable player available in the portal. And that's going to command a big chunk of change, which he's maybe not going to get in the middle of the second round. Leaf, what's your thought on Darrion Williams at this point?
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. And frankly, I was shocked to see him in the portal, considering Texas Tech paid Christian Anderson over $2 million, paid JT Toppin 4.2, reportedly. I mean, I think that the greater point is that Texas Tech was very willing to spend the money to return that trio and then support that triumvirate with other talented pieces as ancillary pieces. So I would say that's what shocked me the most. As for the NBA prospects of Darrion Williams, the thing that I think he could hang his hat on is he rebounded well and he shot well. And you don't see too many people who have the versatility to be a hub of offense, shoot that well, rebound that well in collegiate basketball. Usually it's based on potential, or, what, this guy's an athlete, we can groom him into being a good defender, or, there's always let's see what we can figure out with this player. He's a pretty set in stone piece in that regard. But I agree with you. His offensive game, aside from spot up shooting, was largely derived off of being stronger, being clever. And that's not just, he won't get those touches. Like, it doesn't matter that he's strong in the sense of he won't play in the post in the NBA. So how well does he shoot it? I think he's a good shooter. So I think there is a world in which he's drafted, but I'd imagine he goes back to school because he'll get paid more. And then the next year he's got the same stock and maybe he can elevate it. I've seen rumors that he's going to BYU, and that would be a loaded team, and he'd get plenty of money there. I'd love to see him run it back in Lubbock, because I think that team could be awesome next year. That was one of my favorite teams entering the season. They grew to be one of the best teams in the country, had Florida on the brink. My gut is he comes back to school. I'd be curious to see if he lands in Lubbock or in Provo or wherever he ends. But he's a guy that if he shoots well at the NBA Combine, and I'm not saying well as in, he shoots fine. Like, Jake Powell just has to shoot surprisingly well. Darrion Williams is the guy who needs to shoot well in the games of the NBA Combine, like the little scrimmages, because we know he can actually knock down shots. And I think he's got the capacity to do so. I think that's the real way he moves himself up. I went to the Combine a couple of years ago, and a guy named Ben Shepard went number 26 from Belmont because he hit 8 threes. And he needs one of those type of performances to knock down the shots in the game where the scouts say, you know what, like, he's a ball player. And I think that's kind of the only way he really keeps his name in. And I could be wrong, but that's my gut feeling.
It's funny. I think I thought about the BYU fit when you mentioned that, and I was like, man, with Saunders and with Wright, and of course Dymansa, like there's not as many touches, but that might be good for Williams in the sense that it allows him to showcase the skill sets that's going to be more what he does in the NBA. And the guy we're about to talk about here, Jamir Watkins, like they're guys who had the ball in their hands a ton in college and are being looked at by NBA scouts to fill a role as, either a 3-and-D wing or, maybe a connector or something like that. But they're not going to be guys who have the ball in their hands most possessions. And so like, it makes sense if you can find a spot where you can get paid good money, which we know BYU could pay good money, and you can be more of a role player. Like he's not going to go average 15 a game at BYU with Dymansa and Wright and Saunders on that roster. At least I don't think he would. But if he goes and he's efficient as a shooter, he plays good defense, he gets, crashes the glass, like that actually might improve his draft stock, even if he's a little bit older. And I think a lot of that kind of makes sense to me for Jamir Watkins. I mean, Watkins is a guy who averaged 18 points a game last year at Florida State. Like nobody's looking at Jamir Watkins as an 18 point per game scorer at the next level. Like that's just not going to be his role. Now he's also in the transfer portal. He is not on the most recent Bleacher Report mock draft. So I think a lot of folks are kind of looking at him as somebody who's likely to come back to school. If he does choose to do that, he's going to have a ton of suitors because he's incredibly talented. He's a good defensive player. He's not a great shooter, which I think is holding him back. He was only 32% from three last year. He's also an older prospect, but he's a really good scorer. He's good at getting to the free throw line. That's always been a strength of his. He's a strong defensive player as well. Those guys at Florida State tend to be. But in the same sense of Williams, he strikes me as a guy who might actually benefit going to a team where his role is a little bit more similar to the role he would probably fill in the NBA, so that he can kind of showcase that he has those complementary skills as well. Does that make sense? You think that is something that scouts kind of want to see from a guy like Watkins or Williams for that matter?
Well, that's always a debate because you can look at guys in the NBA that serve roles and you say, okay, what did he do in college? And oftentimes they're the best player on their team because that's just how it's watered down. Like the NBA is the best of the best, and in college, likely you're the best player, just like you were in high school. Right. And that's not always the case. But one of my favorite examples for this is when Mikal Bridges came out. He played a 3-and-D role for Villanova excellently, went number 8. And then his role with the Suns was 3-and-D, and they said, oh, you know what? He could be more than that because that's what he's doing with the Nets. And he scored over 20 a game. And then he goes to the Knicks, and he's the most coveted 3-and-D guy ever, giving up 5 draft picks. Right. So I think the greater point I'm trying to make is sometimes it's easier to play the role that you have played in collegiate basketball, and sometimes it's easier to assimilate having played a larger role, and you just say, you know what, like you simplify my role, and I'm pretty good at this already, and now I can just focus more on defensive effort and energy as opposed to scoring 18 a game and playing defense. Right. So Jamir Watkins, I watched him at the Combine as well. He's a guy that I thought athletically belongs in the NBA easily. I think defensively he's got all the traits, and he's got the maturity, like you said, as an older prospect. And I'm not saying mental maturity in that. I'm saying just like physical maturity, even at last year's Combine against the dudes who have the athleticism to be NBA players. Like that's what they're measuring. He stood out. But what I heard last year is that there was intel in terms of the personal side that had him lower on boards and thus led to him returning. So would I be surprised if he does that again? No. But I kind of think he stays in because you typically don't see a guy go into the Combine once, return, and then go back again. I mean, you'd have to have a disastrous season. And though his shooting numbers got a little bit worse, he was still quite good. So I would guess Jamir Watkins actually stays in the draft because, the clock's ticking for him more than it is for a Boogie Fland, a Drake Powell. And it's a different situation than for Darrion Williams, who could easily return to a team that has an Elite 8 roster that he could easily go to at BYU. And I'm not saying Jamir Watkins wouldn't have suitors, but I think it's a different situation considering he already tried and is considered older. So I'd imagine he sticks in, barring crazy money returning to college. But he's one I'm just trusting my gut on. I think he stays in and he goes in the second round.
Yeah, I could see all that. And Watkins is interesting to me because I think some of the things he didn't do as well last year would be kind of fixed or mitigated by being in a different role than like he had a lot of turnovers, but it's like, because he was asked to be an on-ball role on a team, frankly, that wasn't all that good last year. And I think that that led to a fair amount of turnovers. It doesn't mean he's a great passer or that he'd be a great passer in the NBA. I don't think that's a huge skill set of his, but he's not going to be asked to do that. I think like you said, if he's focusing on defense and knocking down open shots, again, he's not a great 3-point shooter, but I suspect that Jamir Watkins, if put into a more traditional 3-and-D role, coming off the bench and just hounding guys defensively and knocking down open threes, I think he'd be pretty good at that. I think it didn't take a lot to see the ability, attacking closeouts, hitting threes, playing good defense. Like, he could do all of that at the next level. But yeah, I tend to think he's probably gone as well. And I think enough teams will see the potential there to be like, hey, yeah, we'll happily take you in the 40s and give you a two-way contract or a real shot to make a roster, because I think the skill sets that he possesses is enough to get him there, even if the role he's played hasn't really looked like what it would look like at the next level. Leaf, I want to talk about some bigs. Specifically, I want to talk about whether Todd Golden, who just got a big old extension with the Florida Gators, if he's going to get one of his biggest pieces back as this team looks to defend their national title. We're going to talk about Alex Condon's draft decision coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot, what up Tyrese Halliburton, or a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Since we're talking the Gators, Florida plus 3,000 to repeat as national champions. We're going to talk about Alex Condon. That's going to boost or lower those odds fairly considerably, I would think. So we'll talk about that in just a second. And folks, if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Leaf, two more players to talk about, a couple of bigs here. One of them who's already committed somewhere in the transfer portal, but is getting some serious first-round buzz, and another who played for the defending champs, the Florida Gators. That's Alex Condon. Condon not on the recent Bleacher Report mock draft from Jonathan Wasserman. 6'11" big. We know a lot about Alex Condon. He's big. He's a good rebounder, efficient scorer, a willing 3-point shooter, but hasn't actually been great in that space. And I think, to me at least, that's a huge kind of hinge for Condon. If he can showcase the ability to, he doesn't have to be a lights out 3-point shooter, but if he can at least prove he's capable of spacing the floor at the next level, I think that really helps his cause. But under 33% last year, only 1.5 attempts per game. He was 60% from the free throw line. I know a lot of scouts really value free throw shooting as kind of a metric to evaluate potential 3-point shooting, and he didn't really pass the test on that one. But I mean, this is still a kid who averaged 10.5 points and 7.5 rebounds in 25 minutes per game. He's very efficient. He's a good shot blocker. Again, a great rebounder. He had his moments. We saw him kind of disappear a little bit in the NCAA tournament. I know that was injury related, but it's not going to help his perception. It's not going to help his draft stock there. When Thomas Houck made his announcement that he's returning to Florida, I know there was some talk of like, oh, is he going to try to convince Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyelu to stay? I think that is the plan that Houck is enacting, and I'm curious if you think Condon could get wooed to come back to Gainesville and run it back with the defending champs.
So I'm glad you brought up Houck, because that's my guy. Like, I am Thomas Houck's leading fan, and the fact he's back makes me happy, because then I get to watch him again. And I became a Florida Gators guy throughout this season. Like, I took them to win the championship. That's not too crazy, but having them from January on was a little crazy. But the reason I had them, and I could dig out this tweet, but when they played Auburn, and they beat Auburn in the Neville Arena, I tweeted out, look, that Florida might have an All-American guard. Turned out Walter Clayton was the story of the NCAA tournament, and they won the championship. He's the most outstanding player. Didn't know all that. But my tweet essentially said they might have an All-American guard, but their best attribute as a team is how good and complementary their bigs are. So that was about Houck and Condon, and that was in a game where Janai Broome was playing. I felt like Florida got the better in the front court of Auburn. And that spoke to me of how good Alex Condon is. And then a little bit later, I did a podcast with a friend who's a Gators fan, and we ranked out our top in the country or the top in the SEC players, and then how we think it'll actually be voted for the all SEC teams, but what we would do. And I had Alex Condon as one of the 10 best players in the SEC. So I say all that to say this. Alex Condon's a tremendous college basketball player because of his energy and his versatility. He's an operator of an offense that was one of the most efficient and one of the key cogs of a defense that was one of the most efficient. Yes, there are other pieces, but Alex Condon was the guy they'd throw and initiate the offense through. Like Walter Clayton was the point guard and best player, and there were other players that are maybe better scorers than Alex Condon, but he's the passer. He's the head of the snake in terms of initiating the offense. That versatility, being an offensive hub, is very rare. His level of hustle and growth throughout a season is very rare because I know they talked about this ad nauseum on ESPN, but I'll remind you guys, he's an Australian kid who played basketball later in life, and the game he's still learning. And you could see that as his post moves got better and more confident in different matchups. Yes, he wasn't particularly good, whether it was injuries or just kind of being slight of build compared to some of these burlier guys he played in the championship against Houston or against Auburn. And he didn't get good post up position, didn't score in the post. He was getting pushed around a little bit. But his versatility and growth rate at the way he's played college basketball for the past 2 seasons is the allure. I think he tests the waters. I think it's the power of friendship, and Florida's running it back like Joakim Noah and Al Horford. And these are the newest rendition of that. I actually really wanted Hauck and Condon both to go in the draft much of this season. But, if they're back, they're back. My gut is he comes back and runs it back with the hefty NIL.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case too. He's not quite showing up on those mocks yet. I think that the NBA potential is absolutely there. You can squint and you can see kind of an initiator type big at the next level who's also a capable defender. That profile is just so valuable that even if he's, not even if the 3-point shooting doesn't show up, even if the physicality, limits his ability to be effective as a rebounder, like if he can still do that, I think you really like the profile enough, certainly at least enough to take a chance on him. But yeah, I think another year cooking with Todd Golden and the Gators might be the move for Condon. And then last player that I want to talk about here, Leaf, is one of the more interesting decisions that I think we have because of all the players we've talked about, this is the one who is the highest on most mock drafts, but also a player who seems to have been the firmest in having made a decision previously, and that's Yaxel Lendeborg, who has already committed to Michigan in the transfer portal. He's the only player on this list that we were talking about who has made a commitment in the portal. We were going to, we thought about discussing Cedric Howard, who committed to Duke, and a few others, but I'm really interested in the Lendeborg situation here because he was at UAB last year. Bleacher Report has him 26th. He's 6'9" forward, and he's just insanely productive. 2 years in a row, averaging a double-double. That's very rare. 18 points, 11 and a half rebounds last year, over 4 assists, nearly 2 blocks. Like if you played fantasy college basketball, Yaxel Lendeborg's a first-round pick. Like this dude does a little bit of everything. A terrific rebounder, very, very good passer for his size. A playmaker on defense. He gets stocks at a high clip. Yeah, the outside shooting, I think that's a big question for Lendeborg. And if it's not something you feel confident that he's bringing at the next level, I think that that does lower his draft stock a little bit. He also is reportedly getting $3 million from Dusty May and the Wolverines to play in the Big Ten. You got to think that coming to Michigan, where we saw Dusty May utilize his bigs tremendously last year, and Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, it's a great landing spot for Lendeborg. If he goes to Michigan and the skill sets translate and he's a great rebounder and scorer and passer and kind of offensive hub for a team in that conference, it seems like that can only help his draft stock, but he's also already projected to be a first-round pick. It's tough to turn that down. I'm fascinated by what Lendeborg might do because it feels like he can't really go wrong with either decision, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does.
My belief is that he'll stick in the draft because you look at what the sheer numbers are, and more importantly, it's the usage rate. He demonstrated relatively good efficiency at an alarmingly large usage rate. And then if you were to go to Michigan, you'd say, oh, it's the Danny Wolf role. He does this. I think Lendeborg's better than Danny Wolf as a prospect. Danny Wolf's interesting because he's 7 feet tall and he ran a bunch of pick and rolls, but he's an inept defender. And I don't know how many teams are going to give him the ball. That said, Lendeborg, you can make a similar case. You don't know how many teams are going to be giving the ball, but he's got better athleticism, better switchability defensively, which is very coveted, especially as we're watching the playoffs. We're watching how teams defend and you look at how many big bodies are bashing in the post and then sliding on the perimeter. He's one of the few that in this draft class that I feel confident can do that. And it was just about, he played such a large role for his team that it wasn't as an apparent strength, but I think his physical traits lead to that. He's a guy that I think the right team could become infatuated with, because he's got the mixture of skills. I wouldn't call it shooting, but shot making, and then defensive traits and ability to just pass the ball. There's teams that are very tools oriented, size, athleticism, productivity. Those type of teams fall in love with this type of player. One that comes to my mind, you're familiar with, Jonathan Mugbo a couple years ago for the Raptors, and he went to USF, and Lendeborg feels like a more accomplished, more stat stuffing version of him to me. Maybe not quite the freak athlete in terms of the measurables, but compared to competition, he dominated even further than that of what Jonathan Mugbo did, and he perpetuated up from relative unknown status. I mean, Andy and I knew who he was, but that's a deep dive right there. And Lendeborg has had his fans for the last 2 years from UAB, even though USF's a far better basketball school traditionally.
Yeah, I love Lendeborg's game. I think if a team feels at all confident that you can put him in, or you can get him to improve as a open 3-point shooter, which I think you absolutely can, like, he becomes so valuable because he's a switchable defender. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that, especially when you were comparing him to Danny Wolf, like, that's such a massive difference between those two players in terms of their NBA prospects. I think it's also a significant factor for Condon is the belief in whether he can be a switchable defender. I mean, it's key for any big, and for Lendeborg at his size, like, if he's unable to switch onto guards, he's not playable in the NBA, but I think he's more than capable of doing that. And I think that makes him so valuable. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised at all if a team is I don't know if he's going to get like a first round guarantee necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if enough teams are so confident in him that he feels pretty good about staying in the draft and turning down, again, a potential $3 million payday to go to the Big Ten. I really want to see him at Michigan. Like, I'm going to be happy if he stays out of the draft, but I'm going to be happy for him and begrudgingly if he does go in the NBA, because I think he's more than capable of doing that. It'll be fun to see what he could do in Dusty May's offense. Leaf, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We'll do more stuff like this as we get through the combine next week. We get a better chance to see who is coming back, who's staying, what that might look like. We'll have more conversations like this in the future. Of course, Isaac and I will be back with y'all on Friday to talk about some transfer portal stuff, some coaching carousel, all the good stuff going on in the college basketball space here as we get into the month of May. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until tomorrow, peace out.